Hello and welcome to World Panorama, the show that brings you a weekly roundup of all major international news and events. I am Teena Jha. Let's begin with this week's top stories. United States announces it will place sanctions on Russia for poisoning an ex-Russian spy in the United Kingdom in March. Forthcoming sanctions likely to increase pressure on Moscow. Russian Prime Minister threatens to answer US sanctions with other means. US reimposes Iran nuclear sanctions after withdrawing from the 2015 nuclear deal in May. Trump says economic pressure will force Iran to agree to a new deal. Global powers condemn Washington's sanctions against Tehran. Magnitude 6.9 quake leaves at least 300 dead in Indonesia, most victims from northern and western parts of Lombok. Thousands of people evacuated from tourist islands. And Japan marks 73 years of atomic bombing on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Somber ceremony held in Tokyo to honor the people who died in the devastating attacks. The top story this week: the United States imposed new sanctions on Russia over Moscow's involvement in the use of a lethal nerve agent in the attempted killing of a former spy in Britain. Former Russian spy Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia were found unconscious in a park in the city of Salisbury in March. US authorities determined that they had been attacked with a military-grade Russian nerve agent known as Novichok. The State Department said the action is aimed at punishing Vladimir Putin's government for having used chemical or biological weapons in violation of international law. The new sanctions will come into effect somewhere around August 22. The British government has welcomed the move. Meanwhile, Russia has called the latest action by the US State Department as unacceptable. Kremlin said the United States was knowingly presenting demands that are unacceptable as conditions for the sanctions to be lifted. Russia, in fact, has denied any involvement in the Skripal's poisoning and also the subsequent death of a British woman, Dawn Sturgis, after she was exposed to the agent. The move could cut off hundreds of millions of dollars worth of exports to Russia, according to a senior State Department official who requested anonymity in order to speak about the sanctions. And for more on the story, we are being joined in the studio by former Ambassador Niraj Srivastav. Welcome, sir, and thank you for joining us on the show. You know, just weeks before the Helsinki summit, in fact, just weeks before the Helsinki summit happened, Trump and Putin displayed a camaraderie that was never seen before. In fact, it looked as if the frosty relations between the US and Russia were coming to an end. Now, with the fresh round of sanctions, what are your views? Are the relations between the two countries back to square one?
Well, this is the US establishment hitting back with respect to the Helsinki summit. And by the US establishment, I mean the neoconservative lobby. I mean the US security state, which includes the Pentagon, the CIA, the national security agencies, and many other agencies, which have a combined budget of $1 trillion. So they are showing their disapproval of what Trump did.
Okay.
By trying to forcing him to reimpose sanctions. But there is one important point which needs to be understood in this. So far, neither the United States nor Britain have been able to furnish even one shred of hard evidence that Russia was behind the Novichok poisoning. Okay. Even the UN agency concerned, the OPCW, has not been able to establish that it was Russia which was behind this. So why are you imposing sanctions without furnishing hard evidence? And the second point is that where are these Skripals, Yulia Skripal and her father, where are they? They are supposed to have recovered couple of months back.
Yes.
If the Russia story is true, why don't the British authorities or the American authorities present them in a press conference and ask them to explain how they were poisoned by the Russians? But they seem to have disappeared from the face of this earth. So many people are raising questions as to why are you not bringing those people involved in the limelight?
Yes.
And where is the hard evidence? So this whole action of taking sanctions, imposing sanctions on Russia is without any basis whatsoever. And it is just this US establishment hitting back Mr. Trump for committing the crime of meeting Mr. Putin in Helsinki.
Coming to the sanctions, what do you think will be the short-term and long-term implications on Russia and on the United States?
Well, the short-term implications for Russia may be unpleasant in the sense that, you know, the Russian ruble has already lost 5 or 6% of its value in the last 1 week. And the Russian Prime Minister, Medvedev, he has said yesterday that if the US imposes curbs on the activities of Russian state-controlled banks in the US, as well as curbs on the use of the US dollar, then it would amount to an economic warfare against Russia, and Russia will retaliate with all means at its disposal. So in the short term, it will cause hardship to Russia. But in the long term, actually, it will cause damage to the United States itself, because the US is a financial superpower because of two reasons. The US dollar is the world's major reserve currency, and second, the US most of the oil trade in the world is priced in US dollars. Now, if you impose sanctions on Russia or a country like Iran, then what they will do, what Russia has already started doing, is offloading its dollar-denominated US Treasury bills, for example, and moving into gold.
Okay.
And secondly, pricing the oil in a non-dollar currency. Now, once the US loses, the US dollar loses its place as a reserve currency, which will happen if the US continues to impose sanctions on other countries. This is exactly what is going to happen. Like in the case of Iran, Iran's oil exports to China are now being priced in the yuan. Qatar is doing the same thing. Russia is moving into gold. So gradually, in the long run, it will reduce the use of the US dollar, and that will end the US financial superpower status.
So Russia says it is an economic war.
Yes.
So apart from the retaliatory measures, which can be economic sanctions, what are the other ways in which Russia can react?
Well, you know, Russia exports some strategic materials to the United States, like titanium, for example. And titanium is used in the manufacture of aircraft engines by companies like Boeing. That is one thing. Russia exports, rocket engines to the United States, which are used in, in the rockets, American rockets, which are used to launch satellites. These are two concrete examples that I have given you. But Russia it is important to note that Russia has said that, we will not limit our retaliation to economic measures only. We will do whatever we can do to hurt US interests. And that could be political, and political could mean that the situation in the Middle East or the policy towards Israel, what is happening in Syria, Iran, for example, particularly,
yes.
Where Russia has very close relations with Iran, and US has imposed these draconian sanctions. So Russia might help Iran to, get out of trouble. So these are the ways in which Russia can hurt the interests of the United States.
All right. So which means United States is, the long-term implications will have to be borne by the United States. That is what you mean to say.
Absolutely. The long-term implications of simply imposing sanctions on all countries, for example, on North Korea, on Iran, on Russia, on whoever. And not only that, the extraterritorial nature of these sanctions, in the sense that CAATSA, where third countries are told not to do business with Iran, countries like India not to do business with Iran, or India is told don't buy the Russian S-400 missile defense system. This is, first of all, in the short term also, countries like India and China, China has said clearly that we are not going to, honor any of these extraterritorial sanctions. India has said, India's foreign minister has said that we respect only UN-imposed sanctions. So there is going to be an erosion of US respect, both fear and respect, all over the world, which cannot be good for the United States.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us on the show and giving us your perspective.
Thank you.
Moving on, the United States reimposed Iran nuclear sanctions on the 7th of August after withdrawing from the 2015 nuclear deal in May this year. US President Donald Trump signed the executive order intended to impose maximum economic pressure on Iran, measures targeting Iran's automotive sector as well as its trade in gold and other key metals. Trump said the economic pressure will force Iran to agree to a new deal and end its malign activities, also threatening severe consequences for those who continue to trade with Iran.
Right now, the United States is undertaking a diplomatic and financial pressure campaign to cut off the funds that the regime uses to enrich itself and support death and destruction. We have an obligation to put maximum pressure on the regime's ability to generate and move money, and we will do so. At the center of this campaign is the reimposition of sanctions on Iran's banking and energy sectors.
Meanwhile, Iran's President Hassan Rouhani has reacted, saying the act was psychological warfare. Rouhani told Iran state television on Monday that he would welcome talks and blame the United States for backing out of dialogue. The US hit back at the charge, saying sanctions were meant to change the regime's behavior, not topple leaders in Tehran. Meanwhile, the UK, France and Germany, which were also parties to the 2015 accord, along with Russia and China, have expressed deep regret at the US move. They have pledged to abide by their commitments under the deal. The accord saw Iran limit its controversial nuclear activities in exchange for sanctions relief.
ابتداش این هست که نشون بده واقعا میخواد با مذاکره مسئله حل بشه. همزمان با تحریم مذاکره چه معنایی میخواد داشته باشه؟ یعنی اگر یک کسی در برابر فردی که رقیبش هست یا دشمنش هست.
And time for a very short break on the program. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching World Panorama. An earthquake on the Indonesian island of Lombok has killed 387 people. Authorities believe that hundreds of thousands of displaced people were still short of clean water, food and medicine almost a week after the tremor. Here's a detailed report. Hundreds of people were killed when Indonesia's resort island of Lombok was hit by a magnitude 6.9 earthquake on Sunday. A spokesman from the National Disaster Mitigation Agency made the announcement on Monday.
Up to this afternoon, there is an additional 7 people dead, all found in western Lombok. So in total, we have 98 dead. 96 died in Lombok and 2 in Bali, with northern Lombok suffering the worst.
Most of the victims were killed by falling rubble, the agency said, adding that hundreds of people were injured and thousands of houses were damaged. The quake was felt for several seconds in Bali, where people ran out of houses, hotels and restaurants, and 2 people died, according to BNPB spokesman Sutopo Purwo Nugroho.
I previously experienced a 6.4 magnitude earthquake here in Lombok, and that was quite scary. So now we are a bit traumatized.
Nugroho said more than 2,000 people had been evacuated from the 3 Gili islands off the northwest coast of Lombok, where fears of a tsunami spread among tourists.
It took a long time for boats to start happening, but where I was at the hotel there, everybody was just waiting quietly. But when the boat started up, of course, we would have a little mad rush for a boat. But I think they were starting to have that more under order.
We have received information from the field that the search and rescue team coordinated by the National SAR agency has managed to evacuate 2,000 to 2,700 tourists, both foreign and local. They are from 3 islands, Gili Trawangan, Gili Meno and Gili Air, all evacuated to the Bangsal port in northern Lombok. Then from northern Lombok they are taken to Mataram as they will fly home via flights from Lombok International Airport. Those who are staying are in hotels.
A 23-year-old woman was found alive on Tuesday after being trapped beneath a convenience store flattened by the earthquake. Local volunteers and search and rescue officers previously thought that nobody could have survived in the collapsed structure until they heard a voice coming out of the debris.
We tried to open up an access a few times, but a refrigerator was in the way that made it difficult. When we did manage to open access, then we heard a voice. The victim wasn't pinned down by anything. There was a crawl space.
Nadia Revanale was rescued after a grueling 4-hour operation. Rescuers were visibly relieved and hugged and cheered each other with joy after the victim was sent off in an ambulance. Meanwhile, Indonesian villagers said they are facing an uncertain future as recovery process of the destruction caused by the quake is progressing slowly.
We might be still in trauma after 3 to 6 months. I don't think it will be easy to return to normal life. We need to do it slowly because the trauma was extraordinarily bad. Like we dare not to sleep indoors. What is our plan for future? We don't know.
Indonesia sits on the Pacific Ring of Fire and is regularly hit by earthquakes. In 2004, the Indian Ocean tsunami killed 226,000 people in 13 countries, including more than 120,000 in Indonesia. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV. Indian High Commissioner Ajay Bisaria met the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf chairman Imran Khan at his residence in Islamabad on Friday. Bisaria congratulated the Prime Minister in waiting over his victory in the general elections last month. During their talks, Bisaria raised the issue of cross-border terrorism and infiltration. Khan also spoke about the Kashmir issue. Bisaria later tweeted that he had a positive and constructive discussion with Khan. He also gifted a cricket bat signed by the entire Indian cricket team to Khan. Bisaria also felicitated Khan on behalf of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Meanwhile, Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf leader Senator Faisal Javed said on Friday that Imran Khan will take the oath of Prime Minister on the 18th of August. The inaugural session of newly elected National Assembly will be held on the 13th of August, wherein newly elected members of the lower house of the Pakistan Parliament would take oath. In last month's national election, the PTI emerged as the largest party with 116 seats. It has stitched a coalition that crosses the 137 seats needed for majority. Japan marked 73 years of the atomic bombing on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. A somber ceremony was held in Tokyo to honor the people who died in the devastating attacks and try to ensure that they never happen in future. The US attack on both cities in 1945 killed more than 2 lakh people.
Nearly 50,000 participants, including aging survivors, observed a minute's silence at 8:15 a.m. on August 6th. The moment when the United States dropped its payload on the unsuspecting population of Hiroshima on the same day 73 years ago. On August 6, 1945, an estimated 140,000 people were killed when an American B-29 bomber dropped the nuclear bomb Little Boy. It was the first time a nuclear weapon had been used in human warfare. On the ground, the casualties were staggering. An estimated 80,000 people were killed instantly. Hiroshima was destroyed. Hiroshima Mayor Kazumi Matsui, standing at the park near Ground Zero for the ceremony, made his annual call for a world without nuclear weapons and warned of the threat of rising nationalism.
今世界では自国第一主義が台頭し、核兵器の近代化が進められるなど、各国間に東西冷戦期の緊張関係が再現しかねない状況にあります。
Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, who attended the ceremony, stressed that both nuclear and non-nuclear states need to work together to achieve a nuclear-free world.
唯一の戦争被爆国として核兵器のない世界の実現に向けて粘り強く努力を重ねていくこと、それは我が国の使命です。
In India, the Lok Sabha also paid homage to the victims of the atomic carnage. The House stood in silence for some time in memory of the victims. Speaker Sumitra Mahajan called on members to reaffirm their resolve to strive for the elimination of weapons of mass destruction and to work together for peace and brotherhood.
73 वर्षों के बाद भी आज भी हिरोशिमा और नागासाकी के निवासी परमाणु विकिरण के भयावह दुष्प्रभावों को झेल रहे हैं। अहिंसा, शांति एवं विश्व बंधुत्व के शाश्वत सिद्धांतों के प्रति भारत की सतत आस्था, विश्वास एवं प्रतिबद्धता रही है तथा हमने हमेशा विश्व में शांति और स्थिरता बनाए रखने में अग्रणी भूमिका निभाई है। भारत सदैव सर्वे भवन्तु सुखिना के लिए प्रयासरत रहा है। तो आइए आज के दिन भी हम नरसंहार के हथियारों को नष्ट करने तथा विश्व भर में शांति और भाईचारे के प्रचार प्रसार हेतु एक साथ मिलकर काम करने में अपने संकल्प को सुदृढ़ करें।
Japan suffered 2 nuclear attacks by the United States at the end of World War II. First in Hiroshima and then in Nagasaki 3 days later on August 9, 1945. The bombings killed 140,000 people in Hiroshima and 74,000 people in Nagasaki. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
And time for some more international updates in Globe Watch. The United States will impose a 25% tariff on another $16 billion worth of Chinese goods starting the 23rd of August. The new set of measures are the second tranche of tariffs that President Donald Trump announced in March. The first round of tariffs targeting $34 billion worth of Chinese products went into effect on the 6th of July. The 279 items that will be hit with tariffs at the end of August are mostly industrial goods such as tractors, plastic tubes, and measurement equipment like speedometers. California's biggest wildfire on record is expected to burn for the rest of the month, according to fire officials. The Mendocino complex fire has already engulfed more than 2 lakh acres, and barely a third of it is under control. Firefighters are tackling 18 major blazes across the state amid strong winds and low humidity. The fire has been declared the biggest in California's history. Officials had set a target to extinguish the fire by mid-August, but they now say they will need until early September. A global body has added Kanchenjunga Biosphere Reserve to the UNESCO's World Network of Biosphere Reserves. It is the 11th such entry from India in the list of 686 biosphere reserves from 122 countries. The decision to include Kanchenjunga Biosphere Reserve, located in Sikkim, was taken in the International Coordination Council meeting of the UNESCO in Indonesia in July. The Kanchenjunga Biosphere Reserve is one of the highest ecosystems in the world. It falls within the Himalaya Global Biodiversity Hotspot. The launch of the first ever spacecraft to the Sun, Parker Solar Probe, has been postponed for the 12th of August. NASA wrote on its Twitter page that the launch was scrubbed and a second attempt will be made on Sunday morning. NASA outlined plans to touch the Sun ahead of space launch from Kennedy Space Center in Florida, will send a probe on a 7-year mission closer to the Sun than any other spacecraft has ventured. Scientists said the Parker Solar Probe that will come 3.83 million miles from the surface of the Sun. In Ukraine, 57 female skydivers have set a new world record for synchronized skydiving. The participants went to Ukraine from 19 countries for the annual Women on Wings project. The previous record was set in the Netherlands by a group of 56 women. The task was just as challenging as it sounds. As impressively, the videos show the women changed formations 3 times during their 90 seconds of free fall. We leave you with visuals from the record-breaking event. Thanks for watching.